They say in the West, you don't ask questions when a man is bleeding on your doorstep. You just open the door. That's what Clara Ann did. She opened her home to a stranger with cold eyes and a wound that ran deeper than the skin. He never gave his name. He never stayed long. But when the trouble came, when a corrupt sheriff and his men rode in to take her land and break her sons, that same man came back. He came back with dust on his boots and justice in his hand. They say the West doesn't offer mercy, not to the broken, and definitely not to the tired. But sometimes, mercy rides up anyway. The sun was sliding behind the red hills when Clara Ann Greaves stepped onto her porch, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Her boys, Eli and Sam, were down by the creek, arguing about frogs. The hens clucked in their pen. A pot of beans simmered on the stove. It was a picture of peace, a fragile peace. The days had been dry for too long. The wind carried more dust than promise. She had just sat down when she heard it, the creak of wood along the fence line. It wasn't the wind. Her first thought was a coyote. Her second thought was something worse. A man. Her husband had died 2 winters back, defending this little scrap of land from raiders. She'd buried him by the well, but she knew trouble never stayed buried for long in the West. She stood slowly, her eyes narrowing. There he was, a man dragging one foot, gripping her gatepost like it was the last solid thing on earth. He was tall, but the limp bent him. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, stained dark with old blood. A wide-brimmed hat hid his face. Clara didn't speak. She reached behind the doorframe and lifted the old shotgun. She didn't aim it. She just let him see it. He didn't flinch. He just swayed. "You lost?" she asked, her voice flat. He looked up, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't a threat. It was exhaustion, the look of a man who had run out of road right at her doorstep. "Not gonna hurt you," he rasped. "Just need a place to fall." And then he did. She didn't scream. Clara Ann had seen worse. She called for her boys. They came running. Sam, the older one, saw the man and reached for a rock. Clara shook her head. "He's hurt. Get water." The stranger didn't wake as they dragged him onto the porch. He didn't stir as Clara cleaned the wound on his shoulder with whiskey she'd been saving. It was a bullet wound, old and angry, festering. She cut away the infected flesh and wrapped it tight with strips of her husband's old shirt. He groaned once, but never opened his eyes. That night, the wind howled. Her boys watched from the shadows. "Why'd you bring him in, Ma?" Eli asked. "'Cause we ain't the kind to leave a man to die," she said simply. "But what if he's bad?" Sam pressed. Clara looked at the stranger, at the scars on his jaw, at the way his hand twitched like it was reaching for a ghost. "Bad men don't fall where you can see 'em," she said. "They sneak in through your door, smiling." By morning, he was gone. She didn't hear him leave. The chair by the fire was empty. The bloody cloth she'd used was folded neatly on the table. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't taken a thing. The only sign he had ever been there was a single deep boot print in the mud by the water barrel. Clara stood on the porch and stared down the path he'd taken. She wondered if she'd imagined him. A ghost made of flesh and dust. "Ma," Eli tugged her sleeve. "You think he'll come back?" She didn't answer. She wasn't sure which answer was more frightening. Some say justice sleeps in towns like Cedar Hollow. Others say it never lived there to begin with. 3 months passed. 3 months of holding things together with prayers and grit. The hens stopped laying. The boys grew taller but thinner. She traded her wedding ring for sacks of oats. But they were still standing. That counted for something. She was hanging linens when she heard the horses, not a lone traveler. This was the sound of men who knew where they were going. Heavy, confident, entitled. The kind of men who don't knock. Sheriff Reed Malden rode up slow, his badge catching the sun like a warning. 2 deputies flanked him like dogs. They watched her from their saddles, like buzzards circling something that was still breathing. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped down from the porch. Malden tipped his hat, his smile a cruel joke. "Afternoon, Mrs. Greaves. We come bearing unfortunate paperwork." "You can say what you need from the saddle," she said, her voice hard. Malden chuckled. A deputy swung down, a wrinkled paper in his hand. "Official order from the county. Says your property's been reassessed. Says your husband died owing back taxes. You're 6 months behind." He paused for effect. "The land's now under dispute." Clara took the paper. She didn't need to read it. Dispute was just a fancy word for theft. "Funny," she said. "My husband worked this land for 15 years, paid every cent he owed." "Records say otherwise," Malden replied with a shrug. "Ain't personal, just business. We'll be back on Friday to help you relocate." "And if I'm not gone?" Malden's smile vanished. "Then we help you leave." They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and silence. That night she sat by the fire, her sons asleep against her. The shotgun leaned against the wall. The next day she rode into town. The sheriff's office was empty, except for the tall deputy, his feet on the desk. "I want to see the original record," Clara demanded. "The debt, the papers that prove it exists." The deputy stood slowly, walking close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're awful bold for someone with nothing to her name." "I've got everything to lose," she shot back. "That makes me dangerous." He laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. Then he leaned in and spat a single word. "Run." She turned and walked out, the door slamming behind her like a judge's gavel. That night she sat on the porch, the shotgun across her lap. She lit a lantern and set it at her feet. A signal, a dare, an invitation. Let them come. In the silence, something moved at the edge of the field. Her fingers tightened on the barrel, her breath held sharp in her chest. It wasn't Malden. It was just the wind. Or maybe it was something else. Something that remembered her porch. Something that had once left blood on her floor. She didn't know it yet, but before the week was over, the man without a name would return. Not for mercy, but for justice. The 4th night after the sheriff's threat, the sky over Cedar Hollow turned black. Thunder grumbled in the distance. The air was full of warnings. That's when she heard it. The slow, rhythmic clop of a single horse. A figure emerged from the cottonwoods, long coat flapping, hat pulled low. She didn't recognize the horse, but she knew the man. He dismounted, tied his reins to the same post he'd clung to before, and stepped onto her porch. He was leaner now, worn deeper into the bone, but his eyes were still carved from stone. Clara held her breath. "You came back." "Heard your sheriff's been busy," he replied, his voice a low growl. "You came to settle a score." "No," he said, stepping past her into the cabin. "I came to settle a debt." He walked to the hearth, picked up the folded cloth she'd used on his wound, then sat by the fire and began to clean his rifle as if he'd never left. The boys peeked around the doorframe. "Is that him, Ma?" Sam whispered. Clara didn't answer. For the first time in months, she felt safe. "Sheriff's coming tomorrow," she finally said. "I know. Likely more than just him. I figured." She sat across from him, the fire between them. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why come back?" He looked up, his eyes catching the firelight. "Because when I was bleeding on that floor, you didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what I'd done. You just helped. In this world, that's rare. That's worth answering." Clara swallowed hard. You a lawman? Or used to be? He nodded once. And now? He paused. Now, I reckon I'm something in between. The next morning, just before sunrise, she brought him coffee. He stood, brushed the dust from his coat, and checked his rifle. They don't need to see this, he said, nodding toward her sons. Keep them inside. You're going to take them on yourself? No, he said. I ain't taking them on. I'm just giving them a reason not to come. And with that, he stepped off the porch. By mid-morning, they came. Sheriff Malden and 4 men, their faces grim. They rode with the swagger of men used to taking what they wanted, until they saw him. He stood alone in the middle of the road, rifle in hand, eyes steady. Malden slowed, his grin uncertain. Well now, ain't this familiar? The man didn't speak. You got a name, stranger? Malden asked. The man took 1 step forward. No, but I got something else. What's that? Time for you to walk away. Malden laughed. The wind kicked up, carrying the first cold breath of a storm. You think you can stop 5 armed men from doing their job? The stranger shrugged. Don't have to stop all of you. Just 1. The rest will choose. That's when Malden's grin broke. And when the stranger stepped forward again, just enough for the light to hit the scar across his jaw, the one no man forgot after seeing it once, Malden went pale. You. I was a lawman once, the man said, his voice low. Saw what you did in Ellensburg. Heard how you burned that cabin with the family still inside. But back then, I didn't have proof. I didn't have cause. He chambered around. The sound cracked through the silence. I do now. The standoff didn't last long. Malden dismounted slowly, dropping his pistol into the dust. The others hesitated, then followed, one by one, laying their weapons down like men who just remembered the meaning of consequence. No shots were fired. No blood was spilled. But justice had returned on horseback, and it didn't need a name. The sheriff backed away, his mouth dry, his hands loose at his sides. The law had come to Clara's door wearing a badge of theft. Now it rode away with its tail between its legs. But the story wasn't over. The stranger returned to the porch and sat down, rifle across his legs. You didn't fire a shot, Clara said, her voice full of awe. He nodded. Didn't need to. You knew Malden? He glanced out at the empty trail. A long time ago. We wore the same badge. He just forgot what it meant. You going to chase him down? No, he said simply. Men like that run in circles. He'll find his own cliff sooner or later. A heavy quiet settled over the farm. Not fear, but the absence of it. I should tell you something, Clara said finally. About this land. It's not mine. Not legally. My husband bought it under another name during the war. We've been living on borrowed ink ever since. He didn't blink, didn't judge. You and your boys worked it. That makes it yours. She wanted to smile, but a deeper fear took hold. They'll be back, she whispered. Maybe not with papers, but with fire, with friends. I've seen what men like Malden do when they're humiliated. The stranger stood. He looked at the leaning barn, the bent fence posts. What this place needs isn't just protection, he said. It needs rebuilding. You planning to stay? His answer was not in words. He pulled a small worn map from his saddlebag. He spread it on the porch floor, points marked in charcoal. This land's got more than dust, he said. There's a spring up north, hidden, flowing clean. If we can reach it, we can feed this field again. Clara knelt beside him, staring at the map like it was scripture. You sound like a man with a plan, he nodded. I've been many things, but these days, I'm just a man who's tired of watching good folks lose. Over the next few weeks, things changed. The stranger built a new fence, strong and straight. He taught Sam how to lay snares, and Eli how to fish. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the front door, repaired the roof. He worked from sunup to sundown, rebuilding not just a farm, but a home. He never told her his name. When she finally asked, he just said, "Names are for people who stay, haven't decided yet." But the boys called him Mister. And Clara, she began to laugh again. Then the telegram came. A rider brought a slip of yellow paper. She unfolded it. Malden raised men. Rumor says 12. Headed back. Nightfall. JT. Her hands trembled. She passed it to the stranger. He read it, then nodded. Figured as much. You think we can fight 12 men? No, he said. I think I can slow them. He walked to his horse and began pulling gear from his saddlebags. Rope, iron traps, spikes. You going to kill them? She asked, her voice small. He paused. I'm going to remind them what fear feels like, he said. They've forgotten. That's dangerous. She grabbed his wrist. I don't want more blood on this land. I've buried enough. He looked at her then, at the miles of grief she still carried. Neither do I, he said softly. That's why I came back. That night he walked the property line, laying traps, hanging wires. When all was ready, he sat by the fire with Clara and the boys. You protect your ma, he told them. You see anyone come through that door who ain't me, you run. Don't play hero, just get to the hills. Clara reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. If you don't come back, I will, he said, before she could finish. And somehow, she believed him. They came at nightfall. 12 riders, lit by torchlight and the low thunder of hooves. They came like a storm summoned by a humiliated man. Sheriff Malden led them. His badge was still pinned to his chest, but it no longer gleamed. It looked heavy now, like he finally understood its weight. She helped a killer, he growled to his men. Now she pays the price. That's the law. But some of the men behind him hesitated. They had heard the rumors of a ghost in dust-colored leather. A man who once rode for justice, before betrayal stole his name. Hiding in the shadows, the stranger waited. He breathed once, then moved. He struck first. A flash of a tripwire, the boom of a makeshift powder barrel. Chaos. Half the men were thrown from their horses, screaming. Malden shouted, "It's a trap!" But his voice was lost beneath the crack of a rifle from the hayloft. It was Clara, firing into the sky, not to kill, but to scatter. To remind them she would not be taken quietly. The stranger moved like smoke. He disarmed 2 men with nothing but rope and speed. Broke another's jaw with the butt of his rifle. Malden screamed into the dark, "Show yourself, you coward!" And the man did. He stepped into the firelight, his face smudged with ash, hat low over his brow. "I'm right here." "You think you can stop the law?" Malden barked, pulling his revolver. "I'm not stopping the law," the stranger replied. "I'm reminding it what it was meant to be." Malden fired. The stranger ducked, rolled, and fired once into the dirt near Malden's boots. Next one won't miss. Malden hesitated, raised his gun again. Too slow. The stranger's shot sent Malden's revolver flying into the dust. He stumbled backward, his hand bleeding, his pride shattered. The fight was over. Some of his men ran. The rest dropped their guns. Dawn found Clara on the porch. The stranger walked up slow, a bruise darkening his cheek. He was alive. "You came back," she whispered. The same words as before, but now full of a meaning that had taken root and grown. "I told you I would." "We're safe," she said, almost surprised. "For now," he replied. "Safety's a season. It passes. Then you'll stay." It wasn't a question. He looked at her, Then at the boys in the doorway. "I might," he said, "if you'll have me." Clara didn't smile. She didn't have to. She stepped forward and laid her hand on his chest. That was answer enough. Weeks passed. The land healed. Fences were rebuilt. Fields were cleared. The stranger stayed. He never gave his name. When asked, he'd only say, "Names are for graves. I'm still living." But to Sam, he was Mr. To Eli, he was the man with the map. And to Clara, he was the reason she slept through the night. One evening, as the sun dropped low, they stood by the new fence line. "Think it'll hold?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Only as long as we keep standing." They stood in silence. Clara reached out, touching his shoulder. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me that good men don't need a name." He turned to her, his eyes soft beneath the ever-present brim. And for the first time in a long, long while, he smiled. In the Old West, some men carried fear, but others carried quiet. They carried justice, and sometimes they returned when the world least deserved them, but most needed them. What do you think makes a person a hero? A name, a badge, or their actions when everything is on the line? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of a quiet protector, make sure you like and subscribe for more stories you won't forget.